For people who are outside the US, they might not be the residents of US. There is something called 2026 Corporate Transparency Act. What exactly is that, and why is it so important?
Can't afford an attorney, then you probably just want to set up an LLC in your state. And if and when the business starts to make money, you can hire an attorney to adjust the legal status if need to, right? So I think it's important for people to realize that this isn't something you have to get right.
So, coming towards your firm, right? Spera Law takes care of all these things, and you have mentioned that it's very, and people should know that uh, going to a lawyer first is always a better idea. But why should somebody choose you rather than, let's say, LegalZoom?
Well, ideally, if you're leaving a big law firm like you mentioned earlier, you probably already have clients that you're leaving with. So I think that's a good place to start. And then I think this is where identifying your ideal client and where they're going to be makes sense.
Hello, everyone. So today we are joined by another very prominent guest. He's the founder and owner of Spera Law Group. And I could say that he might be a better techie person than me, who runs a tech firm. So he has a mission to help small business owners who also he wants to boost Louisiana's economy. So one of those things that brought my interest into this was because he basically has attended American Bar Association's tech shows, Clio Cloud9, and other major conferences as well, where he was a speaker. So thank you for coming on my show, Andrew.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Away. I'm happy to talk to you.
Right. So the concept that you have introduced, I was very intrigued by this word. You said, I run a paperless law firm. So could you please tell me what exactly is a paperless law firm?
Yeah, I think in 2026 it sounds less enticing or less exciting than it was when I first started this law firm in 2012, right? I feel like I've been a lawyer for that time and started out in 2012 as a paperless firm. And at the time, that was kind of a big deal. A lot of lawyers were still very heavy dependent on paper. And the problem that paper creates is that you have to store paper. So there's old law firms that have been around for decades before paperless was an option, to be fair, that are and not just law firms, but accounting firms, architecture firms, engineering firms, any sort of professional services firms. Uh, they spend a good amount of money on space to store paper, right? From files that are years and decades old. Um, and so, they kind of have this problem of I need to either spend money to pay for the space to store the paper. I need to spend money to pay somebody to digitize it so that I don't have to pay to store it, or I need to spend money to figure and I need to spend money to figure out what I can get rid of, what I can call. So paper creates all these kind of legacy problems, right? Like when the file is active, it's not so much of a problem, but once the file is inactive, it creates all those problems of you either need to pay to store it or pay to delete it. So the beauty of paperless, and we're just built from the ground up to be paperless. It's not like so our entire system and business processes are built around that. And so the beauty of it is storage is getting cheaper. Digital storage gets cheaper all the time, whereas physical storage does not get cheaper all the time, right? There's more people in the world. There's only so much space in the world, so that physical storage becomes more expensive over time. The digital storage becomes way, way cheap. So I think right now we're using like 2 to 3% of our actual allocated storage, and we're not paying anything significant for it. It's just what's included in our cloud-based plan.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what paperless is create a system to not have paper or as little paper as possible.
Yeah, and that also, makes less burden on the people who are going to arrange them. So
Yeah.
that's a big hassle, right?
Well,
So,
and that's a good part
right.
of it too is we have people in the Philippines, we have people in the Dominican Republic, even here where I'm based in New Orleans. I don't have to go to a physical office. And so there's that benefit too, is that my team can be anywhere in the world. I can be anywhere in the world, right? I'm at my house right now, but there's been times where I've worked just at other locations. And,
Mm.
that's a nice thing to have.
Now, this freedom that you're talking about, do you think does it pose a cybersecurity threat as well? Because you're obviously storing so much information that's sensitive, client and otherwise, online.
Uh, I hesitate to say no, right? But I'd also posit that there's always a cybersecurity risk, right? So if I go the opposite end of the spectrum and I only have paper files, well, now there's a fire risk. And if there's a fire, I lose everything, right?
Yeah.
Um, that doesn't mean just because it's physical, it doesn't mean that somebody's going to come in and, break into my file storage and steal things, right? That's not so. I think there's always a security. You cannot eliminate the security risk. Um, in my opinion, I think that the way we have it set up, we're using um, Google and Microsoft to store things. We're using two of the biggest tech companies in the world, and we've reviewed their policies. They have really good security built in. And then on top of that, we have password requirements, minimum password requirements. We're using a password manager. We enforce two-factor authentication on things. So we're doing everything we possibly can internally to secure things. And then we kind of segregate things too. And what I mean by that is we have there's different types of, I'd say, financial security, right? In my opinion, hackers don't really want my clients' files. We do a lot of
Mm.
corporate business work.
Mm.
I don't think hackers care about what a contract says. They don't care what the lease says, right? Hackers want money, right?
Mm.
And so
Definitely.
we have multiple copies of data, so we're protected against some sort of uh, like hijacking attack where somebody plants malware in our system, and I forget what that attack is called, but they say, hey, we're gonna delete all your data, we're gonna release it to the public unless you pay us money. So we're protected against that. Um, but also we segregate things like payment information, so security numbers and files are all in kind of different buckets, and so we're able to. We have greater security controls, for instance, over our payment system than we do over our client files, because, again, in my opinion, a hacker wants access to bank accounts and credit cards.
Yeah,
I don't think a hacker really cares what a client's lease says.
definitely. So that's a great answer. And now I want to move towards the business of law. So a lot of attorneys I talk to, specifically, I've heard that a lot of people, attorneys are sick of working at AM Law 200, let's suppose. Now, let's suppose there's an attorney who wants to build his own firm now. So, what is the first thing he should do?
Um, I guess the first thing is probably figuring out what you want to do. Might sound
Right.
obvious. I think you need to kind of envision what you want. So, who are the type of clients you want to work with, right? I think the days of the door lawyer, if you will, and when I say door lawyer, I mean they handle anything that walks in the door.
Mm.
That is quickly disappearing, and now we're moving into a world where lawyers specialize and then niche down in different things. So I think somebody leaving a big law firm is probably going to have that experience. They're going to kind of know what
Mm.
they want to do. Um, and so I think it's if you're going to leave a firm and go start a firm, um, something else to consider is just the mindset of you're going from being a lawyer to being a business owner. And now, as a business owner, you have to think about these systems. We've kind of already talked about it. How are you going to secure your files? What is your file storage system?
Mm.
How are you going to accept payment? How are you going to manage the work? How are you going to keep track of contacts and conflicts and all that sort of stuff? So it's really a mindset switch of going from uh, I'm I struggle to say just an employee, but I'm an attorney where all that's done for me, to I have to do all that. Usually, primarily, you're now a business owner first and an attorney second. Where when you're leaving a firm, you're an attorney first, and you might not have to be a business owner at all. So I think that mindset switch of, hey, you're a business owner and you need to handle these
Mm.
problems now.
Right. So, when I started working in tech, I was doing everything, no matter what project, because in those early days, you really need to maintain that cash flow. So I would take projects from, let's say, e-commerce. I would take projects from education, other industries. Then I realized that I don't enjoy this. So I niched down to law firms. So I started working with law firms. Do you think the same applies with lawyers as well? Do they need to really niche down to make profits? And what about new people who are coming in who really need cases to survive in the start?
Yeah, I think it's not just to make profit, but niching down helps with marketing. You can speak more clearly to your ideal client. It helps with expertise in the sense that, I've done business law and business transactions for 15 years. If you ask me about family law, I know the very basics, but I am not comfortable at all touching a family law case, right? So really to become more valuable to your clients, I think it does help to niche down, pick an area, pick a specific type of law, a specific client you want to work with, and the more niche you become, the more you can charge. And I think we see that over and over again. Is right now I think some lawyers are charging close to $3,000 an hour, which blows my mind, but I'm willing to bet that those lawyers have a very, very specific set of expertise that they can charge that much for.
Definitely. So let's suppose now I have picked a niche, I have started working. Who should I start selling to initially? Should I call warm prospects that I already know? Should I start cold outreach? What should I do? Should I network a lot? So how do I get my first client as a lawyer?
Well, ideally, if you're leaving a big law firm, like you mentioned earlier, you probably already have clients that you're leaving with. So I think that's a good place to start. And then I think this is where identifying your ideal client and where they're going to be makes sense, right? And what I mean by that is that if you are doing something like a federal practice, like federal trademark law or some sort of law that is based on federal law, maybe you might be limiting yourself by going to the local chamber of commerce and networking, right? I find that our best referrals come from our not just our best referrals, but our best clients come from referrals from other lawyers. Right. So we've been trying to build systems around how do we communicate and engage with other attorneys to earn those referrals and make sure that we're top of mind when something comes up. So that's a key for us. If you're going to go into a field like bankruptcy or a consumer field, then SEO is probably a really good investment because people are going to look for lawyers online and they're going to search. So I think there's not like one universal answer, right? I think this gets back to pick your niche, identify your client, and then figure out where that client is contacting a lawyer. And I think, to some extent that all changes, right? Like if I'm doing personal injury, I might want to I want to be high in Google. I want to make sure that when somebody calls, we answer. I want to make sure that when they start to chat on our website, somebody answers, and that happens 24/7. In the world of business transactions, I don't get a lot of after hours calls. People they're business owners. They don't expect me to be open on the weekends and after business hours. So we don't need the 24/7 phone staffing because people aren't calling us in the middle of the night, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. That would be my tip for somebody there is you got to look at what's going on there.
Right. So the next question is, I have started all this. I'm the initial traction. Now I need to manage all this, right? What would be your top software recommendations in the start for an attorney who's just starting? And what should they have initially to get things going?
So I'm going to answer this question without naming any specific software because I think a lot of people fall into the trap of hearing in software and going and using it. What I recommend to attorneys is start by identifying the problem you're trying to solve before you start picking software. So, for instance, your problem might be, hey, I need email, right? That's a problem. We'll start with that. And two of the big providers there just in that space are Google and Microsoft. So you might need to investigate Google, Microsoft, or I'm sure there's others out there, but those are two of the biggest market shares, and figure out which two of those options you want. Um, and so when I say that, I mean, let's go back to what type of law you're doing. You might be contingency, you might be flat fee, you might be hourly. And so in those different worlds, you might have different requirements. The contingency lawyer might not care about tracking their time. So
Mm.
they don't need a time tracking feature. So really my best advice, and it's an answer that's a non-answer, but I think this is a technique that I've used to find software for me that actually solves problems, is identify what problems that I am trying to solve in my practice, right? And so we've done that. For instance, we recently were moving away from we used to be on Active Campaign for email marketing, and their prices have gone up, and we were getting a renewal, and we realized we just weren't using a vast majority of the
Mm.
features. And we started looking at some competitors and said, hey, we can save a bunch of money by switching. And so what we did was we said, hey, what are we using Active Campaign for? We said we have some basic automations and email sequences. We do a monthly email newsletter, but our deal tracking, kind of our real CRM, that lives in another system. So we don't need deals and deal automation and pipeline and those sorts of features. So what I've done when I need software is I create a spreadsheet, and each row is a different piece of software, and each column is the problems I want to solve. And so I start to investigate the software and figure out, does it solve those particular problems, right? To go back to the lawyer example, does it do timekeeping, right? If I'm a billing by the hour, then I want to make sure that whatever software I use allows for timekeeping. If I don't, and so what's great about that is that it allows me to actually look for pieces of software that maybe fit my needs better than software that is specifically made for lawyers.
Right, definitely.
Hopefully that was a good answer,
So
although I don't think it was the answer you were expecting.
no, I obviously you don't have to mention any software, because you see these days, since AI has come, so many SaaS models are there, and literally every day there's a new SaaS software that's coming up. So lawyers are pretty confused. What do we use and what do we not use? So, speaking of, you manage, you understand which softwares, you have understood your problems, you have signed up for softwares. Now, obviously, you need to put yourself in front of people. So, initially, what do you think is the best strategy? Should you post more on LinkedIn? Should you have a Google business profile made? Should you have a good website? What is one thing that you should do initially to let people know that you're there and you have the right expertise to solve their problems?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it doesn't even have to be a good website, right? A good website could be as simple as, lawfirm.com, and it could be a single page with your contact information and your picture. I do think in 2026, people expect to have just to be able to see a face, right? To see an image of you. It does not need to be, have apps, and to a certain extent, if you're doing business to business, or you don't even need like contact forms and stuff, right? I think, again, depending on clients, you probably want that. But I do think a website is kind of, I will say, as a lawyer, when I'm trying to make a referral to another lawyer, it's a lot easier for me to refer clients to other lawyers, because I can say, hey, here's 3 law firms I want you to go check out. Actually, this happened this week. And I said, hey, here's 3 lawyers I think you should work with. And one of those 3 lawyers, I couldn't easily find their website. So, I was able to send the client the website for these 2 other lawyers, but for the third lawyer, it was kind of like a weird link to his LinkedIn page or something else. So I think it was kind of a weird, it just created a weird experience where it wasn't easy for me to showcase the person I was trying to make the referral to and recommend to contact them. I don't think that's going to help that person.
Definitely.
And you already need and again, we're talking about a pretty small investment for a website, right? You don't need the SEO, thousands of dollars a month. Getting a simple brochure like website page is probably a few $100s, maybe a little bit more. But you already need a domain name, right? I think every law firm, if you're gonna, you should have a domain. You should not have a Google or a Yahoo or some other free email account. You need a professional email. And so if you're going to have a professional email with your domain name, it's not too hard to add on a website to that. So I think that's important. And so I've seen a lot of people have success with LinkedIn. Again, I think it depends on who your clients are and where are they, right?
Yeah.
I think if you're, and how are you trying to get those people? So, the people that I've seen on LinkedIn are people that are looking for lawyer referrals. That's probably a better spot than Facebook or somewhere else. I've seen other lawyers have really good luck on things like TikTok, but that might be because they're doing federal practices and they want to advertise to a broad market. Or I've seen other lawyers who have good luck with TikTok because they're helping people like Amazon sellers who might be throughout the world to get the documentation they need to establish a U.S. business to satisfy Amazon's requirements, right? So I think it still continues to go back to who are you trying to target, how are they going to hear about you, and then you need to go there.
Definitely. So you have set up your website now. Let's say a lot of, like you said, PI needs SEO, they need to run ads, there are other different sectors of law that needs different kind of marketing, right? So initially, would you choose somebody outside US or inside US for marketing or operations? And will there be any difficulties in that? Will there be sort of a risk that you want to mention here?
I mean, the risk with them, whenever you're hiring somebody outside the U.S., I mean, I guess first it's generally going to be cheaper. But the risk is that if that person does something crazy, you don't really have any recourse. And we've had, clients before who contacted us who said, I sent $5,000 to a developer in India. What do I do? I'm like, well, you can kiss the $5,000 goodbye because we're not going to India we're not going to get $5,000 from somebody in India. Sorry, it's just not happening we can do it, but it's going to cost you more than $5,000 to even start trying that, right? So I've used people offshore for places. It kind of goes back to the security question you asked earlier, is identifying what security can I put in place. So for instance, we do a lot of automation, and our hub for that is Zapier. I've been on Zapier for probably over 10 years now, close to the beginning. And so I haven't even really investigated other platforms. And again, that's not a recommendation necessarily for Zapier. It's just because that's what I've used, and I've been with them since you're a techie guy. The days since they had like one action and one trigger and one action. Yeah. Not a whole lot of complexity. So, but point being is that I'm hesitant to give anyone offshore access to that because that it's like full admin rights to our whole system. So that's something that I want to hire US based help for, so that if they do something, really, so I can have law enforcement, on my side, right? If they try to do something, I can bring a claim, I can file a police report, I can do something. So I think you need to think about what are you having somebody do that is, if you cannot pursue this person legally, is that going to be a problem? And I think that is kind of the precipice question of hiring somebody offshore or not.
Yeah, definitely. That should be one of those considerations. So now there's one more problem that I want to discuss, right? So as you start to scale, you start getting calls, right? And these calls sometimes are not really you want to work with those clients. So initially, when you get a call, is there a way that you can tell people how to qualify those leads and save some time rather than manually doing it?
Yeah, I mean, that's something we're always working on, to be honest, right? I think with all of this, I think the trick, and this goes back to the business owner mindset, is that when you own a business, it's very rarely set it and forget it, right? It's set it up once, track progress, evaluate, recalibrate, and do it again, right? I think that's kind of the business owner mindset, is set it up, see how it does, make changes to improve it, evaluate, make changes to improve it, back and forth in that kind of circular motion. So just to that point is I've been having somebody else kind of do my initial screening for almost 10 years. And so we're kind of continually trying to refine that. For us, what's worked is we're a fee for service firm. So we have somebody else that answers the call. We created a client grading scale. And so it's a series, it's 10 yes, no questions. And a yes represents a one, a no represents a zero. And so we're able to score each lead. So I can just very quickly determine, hey, that's a two, probably not going to be a great fit to work with us. Hey, that's a nine. Let's spend extra time trying to get them in the door.
Mm.
Um, and so that client grading scale of just the simple 1, 0 out of 10, I think a lot of people kind of understand that concept, has been helpful for us. And then, our kind of offer is if you want to meet with an attorney, you've got to pay for, we call it a legal advice session. It's $500. It's 1 hour. It's on Zoom. It's kind of the initial stage. And that works for us. I did one with somebody this week where like what she was contacting us about, we could help with, but as I dug into it, she actually needed a bankruptcy attorney. And
Mm.
so I was able to say, hey, you need a bankruptcy attorney. And, I felt she was very grateful, despite the fact that she paid me, right? And that I'm not going to help her with her actual problem. This person was incredibly grateful because I took that full hour. I asked a lot of questions. I understood not just kind of the problem right in front of her, but her whole situation. And based on her whole situation, I think I gave her the best recommendation I could. And I explained some of the basics of bankruptcy, but I was like, hey, here's some recommendations. Actually, this is a situation where I recommended 3 bankruptcy lawyers, and one of them doesn't have a website. And it was kind of a weird thing, right? But
Yeah, definitely.
so that's been a good process, right? And if she was unwilling to book that session for $500, okay, well, I'm not going to talk to you. And so part of why that's a good example of part of why I charge is I felt like I actually gave her, and she told me that I gave her very valuable advice. Whereas
Mm.
if I wasn't charging her, I would now have just given her an hour for free, a valuable hour for free, and I have no interest in pursuing her as a client. Um, but I was able to instead say, hey, this is what you need. This is the help. This is where you need to go.
Yeah, it really, disappoints both sides as well, because free stuff is good for neither of the client or the attorney, actually.
Well, and what's funny is a little bit to that point is I asked her, hey, have you talked to any other attorneys about this? And she said, yeah, I've talked to 3 or 4, and no one else has mentioned bankruptcy. And reading between
Mm.
the lines there, I took that to mean as well, you were talking to those lawyers kind of for free as a friend. And because it was free, they were not taking the time to, they did not set aside a full hour and give you their full attention to analyze the situation and
Mm.
give you the good advice that you needed. Right. So I think we all have that kind of, any professional does that to some extent, right? If somebody's paying us, we give them more attention than somebody who's not paying us.
Mm.
I think that's kind of a human reaction, right? Or
Yeah.
anybody who's in the world of business. It's hard to give somebody the same attention when they're not paying you versus somebody who is. So, you know, again, she was very it was not I gave her advice. I gave her the best advice I could. I don't think it was the advice she was expecting, but she was grateful for it. And I think that's a really good example of an outcome that was, we're both happy with it, right? Yeah, I'd much rather her pay me more money to actually help her problem, but
Mm.
I can't help with her actual problem. So I'm happy that I got paid a little bit of money. She got the advice she needed. She's now
Mm.
closer to solving her problem.
Yeah, that's great, because everybody should respect their time, and that's the most important thing. Now, I want to move towards my side of things. So let's suppose I want to start a business in US today. So I want to file my company, right? What is the difference between starting an LLC, C Corp, S Corp, partnership, sole proprietorship? What are all these things?
Um, well, so you mentioned two different classifications of things. There's a
Mm.
state law legal entity, which is a legal structure, and then there's a federal tax status, right? So a lot of times you'll see the question, should I do an LLC or S corp? Um,
Mm.
and frankly, if you see a professional making that conversation, you should ignore them because they don't know what they're talking about.
Mm.
Because a S corp is a federal tax status, and an LLC is a state law legal entity.
Mm.
So they're related, but they're two entirely separate things.
Mm.
And so a C corp is also a federal tax status. Sole proprietorship and partnership can kind of be both. So if you decide, hey, I want to go sell hot dogs in the street and I'm not going to sell any sort of legal entity, I'm just going to go and bring my barbecue pit out there and buy some hot dogs and
Mm.
buns and ketchup and make hot dogs. Legally, you've created a sole proprietorship. You're just operating as an individual. So sole proprietorship can be it can be kind of a legal status and a tax status. If somebody forms a single member LLC, by default, they are taxed as a sole proprietorship.
Mm.
Um, if two people form an LLC, it's not a sole proprietorship; it's a partnership by default. Meanwhile, to go back to the hot dog stand, if you do it with your best friend, you say, "Hey, let's make hot dogs together." You've now formed a legal partnership. So you have a legal your legal status and your tax status is partnership. So I mean, generally, I tell people it's not. It sounds more confusing than it is. I think generally the advice really does boil down to first, if you can afford an attorney, you should probably it's worth it to probably talk with an attorney early on. If you're bootstrapping it and you can't afford an attorney, then you probably just want to set up an LLC in your state. And if and when the business starts to make money, you can hire an attorney to adjust the legal status if need to, right? So I think it's important for people to realize that this isn't something you have to get right immediately. If the business has success, you can always kind of go back and fix that later on. And I think this also gets back to the idea that the business owner mindset, legal stuff is the same way. The legal needs of a business on day one are not the same as the legal needs of a business on day 200 or 2000 or whatever it might
Mm.
be. So legal is also something that as the business grows, it changes.
Right. There's another thing that I noticed when filing for EIN. There's a term that's called disregarded entity. Could you tell me what exactly that is?
Yeah, so a disregarded entity basically means that it's the sole proprietorship or partnership, right? So when somebody creates an LLC as an individual, the LLC for tax purposes is a disregarded entity, meaning that the IRS does not look at the LLC. The LLC for an individual does not change tax status. It doesn't change what you can deduct. It has nothing at all whatsoever to do with taxes. All the income and expenses for that LLC are going to be they're going to flow through to the owners, the proprietors, uh,
Mm.
the Schedule C on their 1040. So that's basically the IRS does not, that entity will not file a tax return with the IRS. It'll go to the owner, which is different from a C Corp or an S Corp that actually will file a tax return with the IRS. So it's a non disregarded entity.
Right. Understood. So for people who are outside the US, they might not be the residents of US. There is something called 2026 Corporate Transparency Act. What exactly is that, and why is it so important?
Um, that's kind of a loaded question, to be honest. So the Corporate Transparency Act was this law passed by Congress a few years ago that was supposed to bring the U.S.'s anti-terrorism and anti-money laundering regulations, for lack of a better term, up to par with its international peers. Um, when it came time to uh, implement it, and businesses had to file this BOI report, this beneficial ownership information report. Uh, there were multiple lawsuits over it. There was objection from business owners. Uh, Basically, we got to a spot where um, the administration said, "Hey, we're just not going to enforce this." So it's a law on the books that is not
Mm.
enforced. So right now, it was something we were gearing up to help people with in like the summer of 2024, and then now it's there for people who are doing estate planning, real estate transactions. There's some requirements, but as of right now, it's honestly not something we're telling people to worry about too much because the federal government has made it clear that they're not really going to be enforcing anything on that. So,
Mm.
you know, it's one of those requirements that's kind of weird. It's like it exists, but you don't need to do it, which is weird in the legal world. But it's that's kind of the answer. It's basically not as much of a big deal as it started out to be.
Right. So let's suppose I have filed my LLC and I am not a US citizen, it's a foreign entity. Will my home country tax treaty with US prevent double taxation on my US earnings?
Um, if you have that question, you should probably hire a lawyer. Is the advice I can give you, right? Like that is, I can't answer that question like in a good way for you, right? That's not.
Hmm.
I like to tell people this kind of brings up kind of an issue that I like to tell to people is people need to look at legal not necessarily as an expense, but more of either an investment or a cost of doing business. And if you're trying to run an international company and you can't afford a lawyer, maybe you shouldn't run an international company is actually the
Hmm.
answer to that question, right? Um, so I mean that's kind of that's what I really think business owners should take out of this. I mean, we regularly run into situations where business owners have tried to handle their legal work on their own to save money and they don't do it anything close to correctly and it becomes much more expensive to fix later.
Hmm.
And so, what I like to tell people is whenever if you can't afford a lawyer in the world of business, you can't afford to do what you're going to do, right? If you're saying, "Hey, I want to buy a business, but I don't want to pay a lawyer to help me with the paperwork," you can't afford the business.
Yeah.
If you want to bring on a partner, but you're not willing to go pay a lawyer, or you think it's too expensive to pay a lawyer to do the paperwork to bring on a lawyer to bring on the partner, you can't afford to bring on the partner. It's not a good time to do it. And so, generally, that's kind of my advice: is that lawyer is part of look at that as the cost of doing things, not as a uh, and again, I realize that might be easier said than done, but to your point of international, it's going to depend on where people are. It's going to depend who's got the nexus. It's going to depend on what country they're in. It depends on what they're selling, where they're selling, how they're selling, what taxes are we talking about? Income tax, sales tax. What state are they in? Right.
Hmm.
So that's a situation in which hey, you're selling international. You need to look at hiring a lawyer. We tell people they should expect to spend between 2 to 3% of um, their not their gross revenue, but their net revenue. So after cost of goods sold, at least on a lawyer, and set aside for legal fees to try to answer questions like that.
Yeah, definitely. That is why hiring a business attorney in the start is very, very important because I think in the later stages, the lawyer fee is very minuscule compared to the damages you get. So that's very important. Now, I was reading this post other day where this person who was a US citizen, she said that she had a partner, she had an LLC, and then that partner included another partner, and then she was somehow kicked out of her business. She was basically the main chef. Now, one thing that I need to understand, how does that happen, and what is the difference between authorized shares and issued shares? And can you explain how people can protect themselves in case something like this happens?
Hire a lawyer on the front end is honestly my best advice, right? So there's a few different reasons I can't. First is what state are they in, right? That's going to change the impact. So anyone answering the question that's not asking the very first question is which state are you in is not giving a good answer to the question because that's going to change. Are you in Texas? Are you in California? Are you in Louisiana? And all those states are going to have different laws. And so anyone answering the question without first asking and understanding which state the person is in is giving an answer that's you might as well just ask a toddler or make stuff up, right? It's not an informed decision. Second question is, what does the operating agreement say? Is there an operating
Mm.
agreement? Does it address this fact? If it is, then what does it say? If there is not, then what does state law say about the situation? Um, partnerships are tough because they're very easy to form, but they can be hard to break up. And I think this also gets into a situation where, spending money on a lawyer to document the partnership on the front end is the vast majority of times always cheaper than hiring a lawyer to try to solve this situation. And I say
Mm.
try because I've been in a lot of partnership disputes that I can just not solve in a way that makes financial sense for any party, right? I might tell
Definitely.
you, hey, to solve your problem, I need $30,000 to
Mm.
try to solve the problem, right? Not to
Mm.
solve it, to try to solve it. I need that amount of money. Well, I don't have that
Right.
money. Okay, well, sorry, you're up a creek without a paddle. What do you want me to do? And sometimes in business that happens a lot. You know, I think for business partners, and I've given people that advice before. There's just not a way that financially I can help you. Right? I'm going to try to. It's an expensive problem for me to solve. You don't have the finances to do it. And I'm sorry you've gotten yourself in that situation, but you got yourself in that situation because you didn't document things correctly on the front end. You know, it goes back to the idea of you tried to do the transaction without paying a lawyer. Okay, well, now it's more expensive to fix. You should maybe, if you couldn't have afforded a lawyer to do it right the first time, you probably shouldn't have done this. It's hard advice to give to people, but it's the true advice. You know, a lot of times in partnerships, I hear, "Oh, well, I trust this person. It's my brother. It's my sister. It's my friend." And I tell people, I have yet to meet anyone that's going into a business partnership that does not trust their partner. Right? You're going into a partnership because you trust that person.
Yeah.
Right? And so people that's almost a pre-qualifier for going into a partnership. It's not a reason to not document what happens when somebody wants to leave, what happens when somebody dies, what happens when somebody wants to, if somebody is disabled, what happens if somebody gets divorced. The reality is there's a lot of things to discuss on that front. And if you find yourself in a situation where you have not discussed those things and you're in that situation, it's usually more expensive and more, not just expensive, but stressful and time consuming to solve than it is on the front end.
Yeah, definitely. Now, let's suppose all this is going good, but then initially, a lot of people try to, hire employees who are basically contractors. They show them as contractors instead of W-2 employees. So, what are the, if you do that, what are the consequences of that?
Well, first, those are mutually exclusive terms, right? Something I like to say is there's no such thing as a 1099 employee. That does not exist. That's a round cube, right? That just 1099 employees, two entirely mutually exclusive words, and there's no cross contamination between them. Somebody's either a 1099 contractor or they're a W-2 employee. We've seen situations where people get that wrong. Typically, where people get it wrong is they classify somebody as a 1099 contractor when they should be a W-2 employee. There's not really, it's rare, and I can't really think of an example where I've seen somebody that should have been a contract. Like, nobody wants to hire a W-2 employee instead of a contractor because the employee is more expensive. A rule of thumb is that an employee is going to cost you about 25% more of a contractor. So there's a few things that I tell people on this front is, A, neither the business nor the worker get to decide whether it's W-2 or 1099. The state and the federal government say, hey, if this is the relationship, this is the classification. If that's the relationship, that's the classification. So you don't get to choose is the first thing. The second thing is businesses find themselves, I've had clients that find themselves in situations where it muddies the water when they've been paying somebody as a contractor, but they should have been an employee. It creates problems because those are two different sets of laws, right? The laws that apply to contractors are different than the laws that apply to employees. Again, there's no people say, well, there's some gray area. There's not gray area. The gray area is because you have not clearly distinguished between the two. The legal, from a legal perspective, is there's very little gray area. Usually the gray area is created because of bad business planning, not because of the actual law. So they're in two different areas of law. So when you've been paying somebody as a contractor, but they should have been an employee, now you're in this situation where the how you're paying somebody in your relationship with them and the laws that apply to that relationship, there's a mismatch. And now that also creates a situation where the problem can be more expensive to fix than getting it right on the first end. And that can be all sorts of things. That could be maybe because you had somebody as a contractor and they created some intellectual property for you, but you didn't have a work made for hire clause with them, so they now own the IP that they created for the firm. It could be that an employee, somebody who was paid as a contractor but should have been paid as an employee, might have a legal claim for the taxes that the business should have paid on their behalf. Some people say, well, I don't owe them overtime because they're a contractor. Well, if you were paying them as a contractor, but they should have been an employee, then you owe them overtime. So you run into all sorts of issues. We've seen people run into a what I call a practical business problem, where their business model is based on their cost of labor is artificially lower because they're paying people incorrectly. So when they realize they're paying people incorrectly, it's not easy for them to move over because their prices are based upon that incorrect payment. So it's not easy for them to adjust and pay the people correctly and still make a profit. So it creates a lot of problems on that front end. Again, this goes back to one of those problems that's like you can solve this in a 20 to 30 minute call with a lawyer. Say, hey, this is what I want to solve and get this right the first time. Whereas fixing this on the back end is going to be a much more expensive problem.
Right. So coming towards your firm, right? Spera Law takes care of all these things, and you have mentioned that it's very, very, and people should know that going to a lawyer first is always a better idea. But why should somebody choose you rather than, let's say, LegalZoom, in which services are way cheaper?
I think it depends on the business, to be quite honest. I'm not going to bash LegalZoom. I think LegalZoom has a time and a place. So I think it depends on your business, right? It goes back to that idea that not every business, the law is the same, but not every business is the same, right? If you're just starting out and you got $1,000, the same laws apply to you as the business that's been open for 10 years and has $1 million in the bank, right? The law is not, I mean, that's not entirely true. There are some laws that kick in to bigger businesses, right? But generally speaking, the laws are the same. But what happens is the practical impact of that, right? If you're just starting out and you're paying your friend as an independent contractor to do a little bit of work for you, yes, technically it might be illegal, but the likelihood that anything comes of that is much smaller than if you're the multi-million-dollar a year business that has 200 people that are employed incorrectly, right? Same legal issue, but the practical impact of those problems is going to be much different. So, if you can't afford, if the business isn't ready yet to afford, goes back to that 2 to 3% of gross or of net rather. If your business is in a spot where you can't afford yet a lawyer, LegalZoom is better than nothing. Right. I think there's tiers there. I mean, I've actually done work with LegalZoom. I talked to a lot of people where they get a high value out of it, but they couldn't afford to hire me directly. I've also talked to people on LegalZoom who need to hire me directly because their problems are bigger than what we can actually solve.
Right. So the interesting thing is that you've been mentioning a lot that since AI has arrived, the bill by hour attorneys are in trouble, right? Now, as a person who is going to a lawyer, fixed retainers might be a trap too. Maybe in tech side, they don't work really because people don't finish the work. So how do you really address that?
Good. Ask that again. I kind of missed what you were going there. So
my question was that since AI, obviously the charging by an hour is going to be very, very difficult, right? Mm-hmm. But then fixed retainers like a subscription based or a complete package, isn't that a trap as well? Maybe the work that people give you might not get finished.
Gotcha. Yeah, there's pros and cons to each, right? I think my general thought on the two is that hourly charges for the inputs, not the outputs, right? And generally speaking, most people want to pay for the output and not the input. And so, especially with AI, I frankly don't know how lawyers are going to continue to charge by the hour. It just doesn't make sense. In the vast majority of the business world, a better product that you can deliver faster is worth more than an inferior product that takes longer to deliver. And AI is going to help lawyers deliver better products faster. Right? That's if you disagree with that statement, then I would say that you're not using AI correctly. Um, right? And so that creates this, when you're charging by the hour though, you can either like up your hourly rate to something stupid, like I said earlier, $3,000 an hour, which is just like, who in their right mind says yes, that's what I want to do. Um,
Mhm.
right? Whereas when you charge for value, either through subscription or through a project based thing, now you could say, well, do you want your project tomorrow? Do you want your project in 2 weeks, or do you want your project in a month? Because those all have different values to you, and I should be able to charge different prices for those, right? The legal work is the same, but the one that's due tomorrow requires me to stay up all night and maybe rearrange my schedule. Whereas the one that you want delivered in a month, I can do in the normal course of business. Well, I should be able to charge more. And an hourly fee structure, I think some people say, well, we have emergency fees, and that's right. Okay, yeah, maybe you can kind of do that, but you can't really charge different for those different services. Um, so I think when you move to value pricing, which subscription is a value price, is just a recurring monthly value
Mhm.
price, or flat fee. It's kind of the same. I like value price, not flat fee, because flat implies it doesn't change and nobody likes fees, right? Value price implies you're going to pay for the value you get, and there's a price. So I think the semantics are a little bit better. But value price allows you to be more creative in the services that you're offering, and actually leverage AI to do a better job. And so far, that's working for us really well, in the sense that I can tell people, hey, what level of service do you want, and how quickly do you want this thing? And if you want me to respond this week, you're going to pay a lot more than somebody who's willing to wait a month or two.
Yeah, definitely. But there's one more question that I want to ask, and it's going to be a little bit difficult. And that is, how do you define value? It's a very subjective term. Like, we do a lot of work with SEO and websites and other stuff. Now, a value my firm would provide to a lawyer might be different than a value that somebody else has in his mind, because you could then go fight till the bottom, and they might say, okay, we are much cheaper than you, or somebody say, okay, I'm going to respond to you every hour of the work I do, that's my value. So how do you really define value, and how would the client get that, okay, I'm paying this for what value?
It's a really good question. I think the first thing to recognize is that the seller does not define value; the buyer defines value. Right? So I think part of value pricing, as a seller of a value price service, one of the steps that's required is to talk with your buyer and figure out what they value. Right? So just by way of example, you said I'm going to reply to you every hour. That might not be valuable to somebody. Right? It obviously requires a lot of work on your end, on the service provider's end, and I could see how you might think that's valuable, right? That's reasonable for a service provider to think that that's valuable. But if the buyer doesn't see that as valuable, doesn't matter how valuable the seller thinks it is, it's just not valuable. So I think that's what's important, is that value is defined by the buyer. And so where to kind of address this, what we've moved to is we offer people a bronze, silver, and gold option. And we let them opt in to define what
Mm,
level of value they really want.
mm,
And that has helped us, give people the three options, and they opt in to what they want. Are you willing to pay more for faster and better service, or do you want to save money? And you still get a good service. You just don't get the bells and whistles, white glove that's going to come with gold.
mm, mm,
Again, this is that value pricing is way easier said than done, right? Something that's beautiful about the hourly rate is that it's really freaking easy, right? Here's my contract, here's my retainer, pay that amount. My hourly rates are X, Y, Z. We'll get started. I have no clue what it's going to cost. I don't know how long it's going to take. Maybe I give you some estimates. I think hourly is significantly easier, but I do think you're smart in pointing out that um, I think purchasers of legal services with AI, they're going to get tired of
mm,
hourly rates very soon. They're not going to understand. Well, why did it take you 5 hours to do this when you could have used AI and do it in two, and faster. You could have given me that better product faster. Um, So I think that's the key of value is you have to think about it from the buyer's perspective, not the seller's.
Right. That's great. So, thank you, Andrew, for coming to my podcast. And for my listeners, I would recommend that you go check out American Bar Association Journal article that Andrew has just written. It's called "Some Attorneys Are Using ChatGPT to Help Them Practice More Efficiently." It's a great piece. I have read it myself, although I was gated, but I put the link in an LLM, and it just got everything out of it. So it's a great piece, and everybody should go through, read it, and do connect with Andrew if you want success in business, specifically the protection that he offers. Again, it was a pleasure having you today on my show, Andrew.
Yeah, pleasure to talk with you, Awais. Thanks so much for having me. Thank you.